I am Lauren, 33 years old, and my family just tried to laugh me out of a luxury hotel. My younger sister slid my business card across the linen tablecloth with a look of pure disgust. "No one is going to buy your absurd little stickers," she sneered, her diamond bracelets clinking. "You are embarrassing yourself. Go back to a real office job before you go bankrupt." My brother-in-law, a corporate lawyer, chuckled and told me my business model was legally garbage. I did not yell, I did not cry. I simply took a sip of my Earl Grey tea, placed a single $50 bill on the table, and walked away. Exactly 48 hours later, the news of my $150 million startup buyout hit the Wall Street Journal, and my phone began to explode. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent neighborhood outside of Chicago meant appearances were everything. Inside our sprawling home, my younger sister Brittany was the undisputed golden child. Whatever Brittany wanted, Brittany got regardless of the cost or who had to sacrifice for it. I was the quiet, invisible older sister who buried herself in science books and lab work. They never understood me, and I stopped trying to make them long ago. That dynamic never changed, even as we grew into adults. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my mother insisted on a family gathering for afternoon tea at the Waldorf Astoria. I had barely slept in 3 days, consumed by endless legal meetings and final prototype testing for my biotech startup. I had developed an advanced biomagnetic patch designed to alleviate chronic pain for women. It was revolutionary, but to my family it was just a joke. The dining room was a sea of crystal chandeliers and pristine white tablecloths. I sat quietly, exhausted but at peace, nursing a cup of Earl Grey tea. Across from me sat Brittany, now 30 years old. She was a failing real estate agent who somehow always afforded the newest Prada bags, mostly funded by my parents. Beside her was her husband, Andre. At 34, Andre was a highly successful African-American corporate lawyer. He was razor-sharp, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, and incredibly arrogant. He loved nothing more than reminding everyone in the room that he was the smartest person there. My 28-year-old cousin Courtney sat next to them, playing her usual role as Brittany's personal cheerleader. The tension started when my mother Susan asked what I had been up to. I made the mistake of handing her one of my newly printed business cards. Before my mother could even look at it, Brittany snatched the card from her hand. She examined it for a second, before her perfectly painted lips curled into a nasty smirk. She tossed the card onto the table like it was contaminated. "Are you still playing pretend with this startup nonsense, Lauren?" she asked, her voice carrying over the gentle piano music playing in the background. "No one is going to buy your absurd little stickers. It is just embarrassing at this point. You are a 33-year-old woman playing scientist. Go back to a real office job so you can actually afford to buy us a nice housewarming gift." Courtney let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Yeah, save that cool inventor fantasy for the people who actually believe in you." The entire table chuckled. My father. Richard shook his head in disappointment, slicing into a pastry. The laughter from my sister and cousin finally died down, replaced by the clinking of fine silver against porcelain. I kept my eyes fixed on my tea, refusing to give them the reaction they desperately wanted. That was when Andre decided it was his turn to take a swing. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, his heavy gold watch catching the light of the chandelier overhead. As a highly successful African-American corporate lawyer at a top-tier firm, Andre was used to commanding every room he walked into. He had built his entire identity on being the smartest man at any table, and he particularly enjoyed exercising that perceived superiority over me. "Listen to me carefully, Lauren." He began using that smooth, patronizing tone he usually reserved for hostile witnesses. "I deal with corporate structuring, acquisitions, and intellectual property every single day. I have seen 100 wide-eyed founders just like you come through my office. You all think you have the next big idea, but your business model is legally garbage. You have absolutely no solid patent protection that will hold up against a massive pharmaceutical company. The moment your little pain relief stickers get any real market traction, they will crush you in litigation. They will tie you up in court for years until you cannot afford to pay your legal fees. You are burning money on a pipe dream. I looked up, meeting his arrogant gaze. I have a robust legal team, Andre. My patents are secure and thoroughly vetted. He scoffed, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Your legal team is probably a bunch of strip mall attorneys. If you were my client, I would tell you to liquidate whatever assets you have left and cut your losses before you end up completely bankrupt. You are playing a very dangerous game with money you do not have, and quite frankly, it reflects poorly on our family name. My mother, Susan, immediately seized the opportunity to pile on. She set her teacup down with a sharp clatter. Listen to Andre Loren. He is a professional. He knows what he is talking about. You are wasting your time and embarrassing this family. In fact, your father and I were talking about your financial situation just the other day. Since you are clearly struggling to keep this little hobby of yours afloat, you should sell your downtown apartment. I froze, the sheer audacity of her statement catching me off guard. Sell my apartment? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Yes, my father Richard chimed in, pointing his silver pastry fork at me as if I were a misbehaving child. Brittany and Andre are looking to close on a beautiful $5 million home in the suburbs. It is a massive step up for them, and they need a little extra liquid cash for the down payment and the renovations Brittany wants. You sell your place, give the money to Andre to invest in their new property, and when they flip it in a few years, they will give you a small cut. It is a much safer bet than your failing sticker business. Besides, family is supposed to step up and help family. I stared at them, trying to process the magnitude of their delusion. They wanted me to sell the only home I owned, abandon my life's work, and hand the cash over to my spoiled sister and her arrogant husband so they could upgrade their already lavish lifestyle. They were entirely convinced that my life had no value unless it was directly serving Brittany's endless needs. They did not care if I ended up with nothing as long as she had everything. It is the smartest thing for everyone, Lauren Brittany added, crossing her arms and looking at me with that cold, triumphant smile she had perfected since childhood. Just admit you failed and let Andre handle the finances. We all know you are practically broke anyway. Why hold on to a depressing apartment when you could actually be useful to the family for once? You can move back into your old childhood bedroom. Mom has not changed a thing in there. The entitlement radiating from across the table was almost suffocating. They sat there in their designer clothes, drinking expensive tea that they expected me to somehow contribute to, demanding I surrender my independence to fund their luxury. They saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone for the golden child. My father looked at me with an expression that demanded absolute obedience, while my mother offered a fake smile that masked her complete disregard for my well-being. Andre just sat there looking incredibly smug, fully believing his legal intimidation tactic had worked exactly as he had planned. The silence that followed my father's demand stretched across the table, thick and heavy. I looked at each of their faces, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their delusion. For years, this exact scenario would have brought me to tears. I would have argued, defended my passion, and desperately tried to explain the science behind my work, begging for a scrap of their approval. But sitting there under the warm glow of the Waldorf Astoria chandeliers, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, crystalline clarity. The emotional chains that had tethered me to this toxic family dynamic simply snapped. They did not see a daughter, a sister, or even a human being. They saw a financial resource. Courtney leaned over to Brittany and whispered something, causing them both to suppress a laugh. They thought they had won. They mistook my silence for submission, assuming that Andre's heavy-handed legal threats and my parents' unified front had finally crushed my rebellious spirit. My father adjusted his napkin, looking satisfied. So he said, his tone shifting back to conversational. How quickly can you get your place listed? We need the capital liquid by the end of the month to secure the escrow. I did not answer him. Instead, I slowly reached down and picked up my designer handbag from the empty chair beside me. Brittany rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed that I was not immediately sobbing and handing over the deed to my apartment. I unsnapped the clasp of my purse and pulled out my wallet. The soft leather slipped through my fingers as I retrieved a single crisp $50 bill. I held it for a brief second, feeling the texture of the paper, before I leaned forward and placed it dead center on the pristine white tablecloth right over the edge of the business card Brittany had tossed away. My mother frowned, her fake smile faltering. "What is that?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine confusion. She looked at the bill and then back up at me as if I had just placed a live grenade on the table. "That is for my Earl Grey tea and the scones I did not touch," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly smooth and completely devoid of emotion. My father slammed his hand down, rattling the silverware. "Lauren, stop playing games. We are discussing your sister's future. You are going to list your apartment tomorrow morning." I ignored my father entirely. I turned my gaze directly to Andre. He was still leaning back in his chair, but the smug smile on his face was beginning to slip, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. For a corporate lawyer who prided himself on reading people, he suddenly realized he had no idea what I was doing. I locked eyes with him, refusing to let him look away. "You know, Andre," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle hum of the dining room. "For a man who charges $800 an hour to analyze markets and assess corporate value, you possess a shocking inability to recognize a winning hand. I suggest you hold off on buying that $5 million mansion. I am afraid your legal and financial assessments are deeply, fatally flawed." Andre opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His jaw actually tightened. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I picked up my coat and draped it over my arm. "I will not be selling my home," I said, addressing the entire table now. "And I will certainly not be funding your lavish new lifestyle. You are on your own." The moment I turned my back, the illusion of high society manners shattered completely. Brittany leaped out of her chair, her face contorting with rage. "You selfish witch!" she screamed, her voice echoing loudly across the elegant room. Diners at nearby tables turned to stare, their teacups suspended in midair. "You are going to regret this, Lauren. You are a failure. You are going to come crawling back to us when your pathetic little sticker business goes bankrupt. You hear me? You have nothing." I did not stop walking. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished marble floor felt like a steady heartbeat, drowning out her frantic insults. The concierge quickly opened the heavy glass doors for me, and I stepped out into the crisp Chicago afternoon. The cool air hit my face, refreshing and full of promise. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a quick message to my lead attorney. "Lock the contract. We go public on Thursday." I smiled as I hit send. Brittany thought I had nothing, but she was about to find out exactly what happens when the scapegoat you threw away turns out to be the billionaire you desperately need. Exactly 48 hours later, the world woke up to a different reality. It was Thursday morning, and fog hung over the Chicago skyline outside my apartment. I stood in my kitchen holding black coffee, watching the microwave clock tick toward 8. My legal team had finalized the documents after midnight. The heavy ink was dry. The staggering funds were securely deposited directly into my private accounts. Before the article dropped, I had opened my banking application. The balance had transformed from a few $1,000s into an incomprehensible 9-figure sum. Seeing those numbers on the screen made my chest tighten with a mixture of disbelief and immense pride. The strict media embargo was finally about to lift. At exactly 8, my phone sat quiet on the counter. Then the dark screen suddenly lit up. A single email notification appeared from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was simple, but it carried the weight of a nuclear bomb within the tech industry. OmniHealth acquires female-founded pain management startup for $150 million in an all-cash deal. For 5 seconds, my apartment remained silent. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the victory. Then the absolute, undeniable chaos began. My phone vibrated violently against the granite, producing a loud buzz that sounded like an angry swarm of hornets. The screen flashed frantically as notifications poured in, the operating system struggling to keep up. It was a relentless avalanche of digital noise. First came Google alerts pinging rapidly as Bloomberg, Forbes, and CNBC picked up the Wall Street Journal exclusive. The business world was waking up to the news that a 33-year-old founder had just executed one of the largest all-cash healthcare acquisitions of the year. Then came the text messages. My inbox was flooded with desperate messages from venture capitalists who had previously ignored my pitch decks. Men in expensive suits who had laughed me out of boardrooms were now sending friendly texts, pretending we were old friends. "Congratulations, Lauren. We always knew you had a unicorn on your hands," read one message from a tech investor who had called my medical patches a cute science fair project just 6 months prior. I deleted his message without a second thought. The buzzing grew even more intense. My phone began to ring endlessly, cutting through the morning. Local news stations, medical journal editors, and financial podcast hosts were scrambling to secure the first exclusive interview. The device grew physically warm to the touch from the sheer volume of incoming data. I watched my lock screen fill with names of industry giants, former classmates, and people I had not spoken to since high school. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the newly minted millionaire. I opened the Wall Street Journal article on my tablet. The lead reporter had written a glowing profile on my company. The piece detailed how my biomagnetic patch, the same invention my sister had called an absurd little sticker, was about to become the gold standard in female pain management worldwide. The article praised the rigorous clinical trials, the flawless patent protection I had secured, and the simplicity of the product design. The journalist noted that OmniHealth had bypassed standard stock options to pay the entire $150 million upfront in cash. It was a rare corporate move that signaled absolute confidence in my technology. As I scrolled through the article, I felt a profound sense of validation settling into my bones. Every sleepless night in the laboratory, every maxed-out credit card, and every humiliating family dinner had led exactly to this moment. The financial world was validating the worth of the family scapegoat. I walked to the window, looking out over the waking city. My phone was still rattling against the counter, a physical manifestation of my new reality. I had no intention of answering any media inquiries just yet. Let the journalists wait. Let the hype build naturally. My public relations team at OmniHealth was handling the flood of press releases. My only job this morning was to breathe and absorb the magnitude of what I had accomplished. But mixed within the flood of investors and journalists, a different type of notification finally started to trickle in. These were not calls from Wall Street bankers. These were text messages originating directly from the affluent Chicago suburbs. The financial news had officially reached the country club demographic. The same people who had smirked at my business card 48 hours ago were now staring in shock at the financial section. My phone screen lit up, displaying the name I knew would eventually appear. The storm was just beginning, and I was entirely ready to watch them all drown in their own hypocrisy. The first notification that truly caught my attention was a missed call from my mother. It was followed immediately by a voicemail notification. 2 days ago, she was pressuring me to sell my only home. Now she was calling me before 9 in the morning. I pressed the phone to my ear and tapped the play icon leaning against my kitchen counter. "Lauren, sweetheart, it is." "Mom." Her voice poured through the speaker, dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone I had not heard since Brittany won her middle school spelling bee. "I just saw the news on television. We are in absolute shock. I am literally crying tears of joy right now. I always knew you were going to do something incredible with that brilliant mind of yours. Your father and I always believed in your little project. Call me the second you get this. We need to celebrate properly as a family. We love you so much." I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen in pure disgust. My little project. Just 48 hours ago, it was an absurd little sticker business that was embarrassing the family. Now it was a brilliant endeavor she had apparently supported from day one. The sheer velocity of her backpedaling was almost impressive. She had completely erased her own cruelty from her memory the moment 9 figures were attached to my name. Before the voicemail even finished saving, a rapid series of text messages began appearing. They were from my father. "Lauren, just saw the journal. Incredible work. I always knew you had the entrepreneurial spirit in your blood. I am a very proud father today. Let us grab lunch this weekend. We need to discuss how to structure this capital to avoid massive tax hits. I have some excellent wealth management strategies for you. Call me." I let out a harsh laugh that echoed in my empty kitchen. Richard, the man who had ordered me to hand my life savings over to his spoiled youngest daughter, now wanted to manage my wealth. He wanted to play the role of the proud, guiding patriarch. He was already calculating how to get his hands on the money, disguising his greed as paternal advice. The absolute lack of shame was breathtaking. I did not reply to him. I did not call my mother back. I simply locked my phone and set it down. Their sudden affection was not just fake, it was deeply insulting. It was a glaring confirmation that they had never loved me for who I was, only for what I could potentially provide for them. And now that I had provided more than they could ever comprehend, I was suddenly the golden child. But I was not interested in playing their twisted game anymore. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. Today was not about family drama or resolving decades of emotional neglect. Today was about cementing my professional legacy. I pulled out a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit I had purchased specifically for this occasion. I dressed methodically, adjusting the lapels and slipping on classic black stiletto heels. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the quiet, dismissed daughter who used to beg for scraps of approval. She was the CEO of a 9-figure enterprise. I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the final transition documents and headed for the door. A sleek black town car was already waiting for me downstairs, courtesy of the Omni Health team. The uniformed driver opened the heavy door, and I slid into the quiet leather-scented interior. As the car navigated through the Chicago traffic, my mind shifted entirely to the high-stakes transition meeting ahead. Omni Health had paid a massive premium for my company, and today was the crucial day we mapped out the integration of my proprietary technology into their massive global supply chain. I was about to sit in a cutting-edge boardroom with powerful men and women who controlled billions of dollars in international medical assets. These executives respected my intellect, my patents, and my ruthless dedication to my product. They saw my value, unlike the people who shared my last name. My phone buzzed again from inside my purse. Another text from my father. Another missed call from my mother. I reached in, switched the device to airplane mode, and closed my bag securely. Let them panic. Let them realize that their sudden praise meant absolutely nothing to me. They had spent 33 years showing me exactly who they were, and no amount of fake pride or sweet voicemails could erase that reality. The balance of power had permanently shifted, and I was ready for the real business world to finally see my worth. The meeting at OmniHealth headquarters lasted for 6 grueling but exhilarating hours. I sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, surrounded by top-tier executives and legal sharks, seamlessly navigating the complex integration of my biomagnetic patch into their global supply chain. There were no condescending remarks about my gender or my age. There was only absolute respect for the technology I had built from the ground up. By the time I finally stepped out of the glass-enclosed boardroom and walked into the sleek executive lounge overlooking the Chicago skyline, I felt a deep, resonant triumph. I ordered a sparkling water, finally pulling my phone off airplane mode to check the state of the outside world. The notifications immediately flooded the screen again, but one particular name dominated the display. Brittany. She had called me 17 times while I was in the meeting. She had also left 4 voicemails and sent an endless stream of text messages, each one growing progressively more frantic. The latest text read, "Lauren, pick up the phone right now. We need to go to Oak Street downtown immediately. The luxury boutiques are closing soon and we have so much to celebrate." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The sheer audacity of her text was almost comical. 2 days ago, I was an embarrassment who needed to sell her tiny apartment to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle. Today, I was suddenly her ticket to a luxury shopping spree. I debated ignoring her entirely, but I knew my sister well. If I did not answer, she would escalate the situation, likely showing up at Omni Health Security to make a massive scene. I pressed the call button and brought the phone to my ear, mentally preparing myself for her predictable fake enthusiasm. She answered on the first ring. Lauren. Oh my gosh, finally. Her voice shrieked through the speaker, pitched artificially high in a tone that grated on my nerves. I have been trying to reach you all day long. You absolutely have to come meet me downtown right now. We need to do a massive sisterly shopping spree to celebrate your little buyout. I already called the personal shopper at Chanel and told them to pull the newest collection for us. I am going to help you completely revamp your wardrobe. You are in a whole new tax bracket now, sister. You cannot be seen wearing those boring lab clothes anymore. I let her finish her manic, breathless monologue. I did not match her energy. I kept my voice flat, cold, and utterly professional. Brittany, I am not going shopping with you. There was a brief pause on the line. What do you mean? She asked, her fake enthusiasm faltering slightly. Lauren, do not be boring. This is a huge day. You just made millions of dollars. We are supposed to be celebrating together. I even cleared my entire afternoon schedule for you. You owe me this fun sister bonding time. You do not have a schedule, Brittany. I replied, my voice steady and unforgiving. You are a failing real estate agent who survives on our parents' credit cards. And as for celebrating, I am currently standing in the executive lounge of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate after successfully transitioning my life's work. I am running an empire. I do not have the time or the desire to play pretend with someone who told me to my face that my invention was an absurd joke. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. I could practically hear the gears turning very rapidly. When she finally spoke again, the high-pitched, sugary voice was gone entirely. The mask slipped, revealing the bitter, entitled golden child underneath. Excuse me, she snapped, her tone instantly turning venomous. I was trying to do something nice for you. You do not have to be such an arrogant witch just because you got lucky with some stupid medical company. You think you are so much better than us now. Do not forget who you are, Lauren. You are family, she screamed into the phone, losing all composure. You owe us. You cannot simply just hoard all that money. I do not owe you a single dime, Brittany, I stated coldly. Do not call me again today. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed end call, cutting off her frantic screaming mid-sentence. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city traffic move silently below. Brittany's reaction was exactly what I had expected. She was not happy for my success. She was furious that she could not control it. I turned away from the window, ready to head back to my apartment. I had no idea the real confrontation was fast approaching tonight. By the time I finally returned to my downtown apartment, the city was bathed in the neon glow of streetlights. I unlocked my door, dropped my heavy leather briefcase by the entryway, and kicked off my stiletto heels. The quiet sanctuary of my living room was exactly what I needed after the relentless chaos of the day. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and leaned against the granite island, letting the silence wash over me. But that silence did not last long. The electronic keypad on my front door beeped sharply. 3 quick tones followed by the heavy click of the deadbolt sliding open. My heart spiked. Only my parents had the emergency access code to my apartment, a privilege I had given them years ago and foolishly forgot to revoke. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud thud. My father marched into the entryway, not even bothering to wipe his shoes. Right behind him was my mother, clutching her designer purse like a shield. Then came Brittany, her face twisted in a deep scowl, followed closely by Andre, who looked as smug and calculating as ever in his dark navy suit. They did not look like a family coming to celebrate a monumental business victory. They looked like a collection of loan sharks coming to collect a debt. "What are you doing here?" I asked, setting my glass down on the island. "I did not invite you in." My father ignored my question completely. He marched straight across the hardwood floor, closing the distance between us in seconds. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick, folded legal document, and aggressively slapped it down onto the marble surface of my kitchen island. The heavy paper landed with a sharp smack that echoed through the quiet apartment. "We are not here to play games with you tonight, Lauren," my father barked, his voice filled with that familiar demanding authority he used whenever he wanted me to submit. "Your sister called us in tears this afternoon. She said you were being completely unreasonable and refusing to help her. I will not tolerate this kind of selfish behavior in my family, especially not now." I looked down at the document. The bold text at the top was impossible to miss. It was a guarantor agreement for a luxury real estate purchase. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Andre stepped forward, sliding his hands into his pockets. He offered a cold, patronizing smile. "That is the guarantor contract for the $5 million property in the suburbs, the one we discussed at tea. The mortgage company needs a guarantor with significant liquid assets to finalize the underwriting process. Since the Wall Street Journal kindly informed the entire world that you are now sitting on $150 million in cash, you are perfectly positioned to sign it." I stared at him, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of their audacity. "You broke into my home at night to demand I co-sign a $5 million mortgage for a house I will never live in. Do not use that tone with us," my mother snapped, stepping out from behind my father. "You have more money than you could ever possibly spend in a lifetime, Lauren. Your sister deserves to live in a safe, beautiful neighborhood. You are rich now. It will not cost you a single penny unless they default, and Andre makes plenty of money to cover the monthly payments. You are just signing a piece of paper to secure the loan. It is the absolute least you can do after treating her so poorly on the phone today." Brittany crossed her arms, her eyes glaring daggers at me. "You owe me this, Lauren. You humiliated me at the hotel. You embarrassed me today. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will never forgive you." My father reached into his pocket again and pulled out a heavy silver pen. He clicked it once and tossed it onto the contract. It rolled across the paper and stopped right in front of me. "Sign the damn paper, Lauren," my father commanded, leaning over the island to intimidate me. "You got your little buyout. You had your moment of glory in the news. Now it is time to do your duty to this family and make sure your sister is taken care of." I looked at the silver pen resting on the thick stack of legal demands. I looked at Andre, who was watching me like a hawk, fully expecting me to cave under the combined pressure of my parents. I slowly reached out and wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the pen. The silver felt heavy against my skin. My father let out a quiet sigh of relief, clearly believing his forceful tone had finally broken my resolve. My mother offered a tight, satisfied smile, already picturing herself attending lavish parties at Brittany's new mansion. Andre crossed his arms, nodding slightly as if my submission was simply the logical conclusion to his brilliant legal strategy. They all stood in my kitchen, waiting for me to sign away my freedom and my fortune. Instead of bringing the pen to the paper, I held it up to the light, examining it for a long moment. It was an expensive pen, engraved with my father's initials. I let out a soft chuckle. The chuckle grew into a genuine, unbridled laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of my apartment. It was not a laugh of joy, but of absolute staggering disbelief at the sheer audacity of the people standing in front of me. My father's face immediately darkened. "What is so funny, Lauren?" he demanded, his voice thick with anger. "There is nothing funny about your sister's future." I stopped laughing and looked directly at him. I dropped the silver pen. It hit the marble island with a sharp clatter and rolled off the edge, dropping onto the hardwood floor. Then I placed both of my hands firmly on the $5 million guarantor contract. I looked Andre dead in the eye, grabbed the thick stack of premium legal paper, and slowly, deliberately ripped it right down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was loud and final. I stacked the torn halves together and ripped them again, reducing their precious legal document to useless scraps. I let the pieces fall from my hands, scattering them across the polished granite of my kitchen island. "Are you out of your mind?" my father roared, slamming his fist down on the counter. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Before I could even answer, Brittany sprang into action. Her face crumpled, and she let out a loud, theatrical sob. She covered her face with her hands, forcing out tears with the practiced ease of a seasoned manipulator. "You are so evil, Lauren," she wailed, leaning heavily against my mother for support. "You are completely evil. I cannot believe you would do this to your own family." My mother immediately wrapped her arms around Brittany, glaring at me with pure hatred. "Look what you have done," she hissed. "Are you happy now? You broke your sister's heart." Brittany peeked out from behind her hands, her voice trembling perfectly. "I only wanted us to be close, Lauren. I thought we could finally have a real relationship now that you are successful. But look at you. This money has completely changed you. You have turned into this cold, heartless monster who only cares about herself. You are punishing me just because I wanted to celebrate with you today." The gaslighting was so textbook it was almost boring. She was completely rewriting history in real time, painting herself as the loving, supportive sister who was being cruelly victimized by my newfound wealth. She conveniently forgot the Waldorf Astoria. She forgot calling my life's work a joke. She forgot demanding I sell my home. In her twisted narrative, I was the villain for simply refusing to hand over millions of dollars to someone who had spent her entire life tearing me down. "Money did not change me, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the chaos unfolding in my kitchen. "Money just gave me the ability to finally say no to you. And that is what you are actually crying about. You are not heartbroken. You are panicking because you realize I am no longer your personal ATM. You are a selfish witch," she screamed, dropping the crying act for a split second before remembering to sob again. "You have $150 million. You have more money than you could ever spend. Signing that paper meant absolutely nothing to you, but it meant everything to me. You are ruining my life on purpose just to be cruel." Andre stepped forward, his smug demeanor completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. He stepped on the silver pen that had rolled onto the floor, not even noticing the crunch. He placed his hands flat on the island, leaning close to me. "You think you are so smart, Lauren," he said softly, his voice cutting through Brittany's dramatic wailing. "You think tearing up a piece of paper means you win? You have no idea how this game is actually played. If you want to do this the hard way, we will do it the hard way." Andre slowly stood up straight, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the lapel of his expensive navy suit. The patronizing, smug brother-in-law I had known for years vanished entirely, replaced by a ruthless corporate predator. He turned around, picked up his sleek leather briefcase from the entryway floor, and set it squarely on my kitchen island, right over the torn pieces of the guarantor contract. The heavy brass latches clicked open with a sharp metallic sound that echoed in the tense silence of the room. Even Brittany stopped her fake crying, wiping her eyes to watch her husband go to work. My parents exchanged a confused glance, clearly unaware of whatever backup plan Andre had prepared. I watched him carefully as he reached inside the briefcase and pulled out a single, perfectly smooth sheet of paper. He did not slap it down like my father had done. Instead, he slid it across the marble surface toward me with the calm, calculated precision of a man who held a loaded weapon. "Take a good look at that, Lauren," he instructed, his voice dangerously quiet. I looked down at the paper. It was a printed email. The date stamp at the top was from 4 years ago, back when my biotech company was nothing more than a desperate idea and a pile of legal debt. The email was from my personal address sent directly to Andre. The subject line read, "Quick favor regarding startup charter draft." I read the brief message I had written all those years ago. In it, I had asked him as my brother-in-law to take a quick glance at my foundational articles of incorporation just to make sure I had not missed any glaring loopholes before I filed them with the state. He had sent back a 2-sentence reply confirming it looked fine. I looked back up at him. "You printed an email from 4 years ago," I asked, genuinely baffled. "Am I supposed to be intimidated by a favor you did for me over a holiday weekend?" Andre smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. That was not a favor, Lauren. In the eyes of the law, that was professional legal consultation provided by a licensed attorney during the formative stages of your corporate entity. I reviewed your founding documents. I advised you on your charter. My intellectual property and corporate structuring expertise helped lay the foundation for the company that you just sold to OmniHealth. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the island again. Under state corporate law, my uncompensated legal work constitutes sweat equity. I am a founding contributor to your startup. And since we never signed a formal contract waiving my right to compensation, I am legally entitled to a percentage of the company valuation at the time of its sale. My father narrowed his eyes, a greedy spark igniting in his expression. You own a piece of her company? Richard asked, stepping closer to the island to look at the printed email. 10%, Andre replied smoothly, never taking his eyes off me. 10% is the standard industry precedent for foundational legal sweat equity. Your company sold for $150 million in cash today, Lauren. That means my rightful legally defensible share of that buyout is exactly $15 million. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Brittany let out a sharp gasp of delight, completely forgetting her victim routine. $15 million, she repeated, her eyes practically shining with dollar signs. Oh my gosh, Andre, we do not even need her to sign the house contract anymore. We can buy it in cash tomorrow. You are completely out of your mind, Andre, I said, keeping my posture rigid. A 2-sentence email reply does not give you a 10% stake in a biotech firm. No judge in this country would ever grant you $15 million for looking at a standard template I downloaded from the internet. You are grasping at straws because you are mad. I will not fund your lifestyle. Andre let out a dark, chilling laugh. He picked up the email and tapped it lightly against his palm. You are right, Lauren. A judge might throw it out eventually. After months of grueling litigation. After depositions, discovery periods, and endless court hearings. But that is the beauty of corporate law. It does not matter if I win the lawsuit. It only matters that I file it. OmniHealth is a publicly traded conglomerate. They hate bad press and they absolutely despise pending intellectual property lawsuits connected to their acquisitions. If I formally file a claim for my equity tomorrow morning, OmniHealth will freeze the entire buyout. Your cash payout will be legally locked down. Andre's voice was eerily calm as he outlined his threat, letting the reality of his words sink into the quiet kitchen. He walked over to the torn pieces of the guarantor contract, still scattered across my island, and brushed them aside with the back of his hand. It is standard operating procedure, Lauren. He continued, folding his arms across his chest and looking at me with dead eyes. The moment my firm files an injunction citing an unresolved equity dispute, OmniHealth will legally panic. Their compliance department will flag the acquisition immediately. The $150 million currently sitting in your accounts or pending transfer will be completely frozen by a federal judge until the dispute is fully settled. You will not be able to touch a single dime to fund your new operations. I stood perfectly still, my mind racing desperately through the dense legal clauses of my merger and acquisition contract. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach because I knew he was absolutely right about corporate behavior. OmniHealth was a massive, highly risk-averse conglomerate. They had paid an unprecedented premium for my company specifically because I had assured them my patent portfolio and ownership structure were pristine. If a high-profile corporate lawyer suddenly emerged claiming a 10% foundational stake, their board of directors would slam the brakes on the entire transition without a second thought. They would lock the massive funds in a secure escrow account. My entire life's work, the revolutionary biomagnetic patches I had spent years sacrificing everything to develop, would be trapped in a miserable state of legal purgatory while ruthless lawyers fought over a meaningless 4-year-old email. You would actually tie up a medical innovation that could actively help millions of women just to extort money from me? I asked, staring at him in total disbelief. You know you did not contribute anything of value to this company, Andre. You are deliberately fabricating a baseless lawsuit to steal $15 million. It is not extortion, Lauren. It is just aggressive business, he replied smoothly, a deeply self-satisfied smirk returning to his face. I provided professional legal counsel. I am simply seeking my rightful corporate compensation. And let us be completely honest with each other here in this room. You do not have the time, the patience, or the energy to fight a protracted legal battle with me. You are a scientist, not a seasoned litigator. By the time we finish the grueling discovery phase a year from now, OmniHealth might just terminate the acquisition altogether to avoid the massive public relations nightmare. Is your stubborn pride really worth losing $150 million over a simple payout? Brittany stepped up beside her husband, her face flushed with greedy excitement. She practically vibrated with malicious energy. Just pay him, Lauren, she demanded, as if she were ordering a casual drink at a bar. $15 million is basically nothing to you now. You are being completely greedy and irrational. If you just write the check right now, this all goes away, and we can go back to being a happy family. You brought this entirely on yourself by tearing up my house contract and disrespecting us. Now it is going to cost you 3 times as much just to fix your mistake. My father stepped forward next, his expression hardening as he aligned himself completely with his wealthy son-in-law. Listen to your brother-in-law, Lauren, he ordered sharply. He knows the corporate law inside and out. You are way out of your depth here. You thought you could just take the money and turn your back on the people who raised you. But the real world does not work like that. You owe a massive debt to this family. Andre is just using the legal system to make sure you actually pay it. If he has to freeze your little deal to make you understand basic respect, then I fully support his decision. I looked at my parents feeling a profound and sickening sense of disgust. They were actively cheering for my professional downfall. They were entirely willing to watch my brother-in-law destroy my company, my reputation, and my future, all so they could skim millions off the top to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle. The betrayal was absolute and unforgiving. There was no misunderstanding here at all. They were literally holding my success hostage in my own kitchen. Andre picked up his sleek briefcase, snapping the heavy brass latches shut with a sharp click. You have until tomorrow morning, Lauren, he stated coldly, 9 o'clock sharp. If $15 million is not wired into my firm's trust account, I am formally filing the legal injunction immediately. Andre stood there waiting for me to break. He expected tears or panic or desperate negotiation. But I simply looked at him completely silent, calculating my next move. The silence in the kitchen stretched out thick and suffocating. I did not blink. I did not shake. My lack of fear was not what they had anticipated. And that silence is what finally broke my mother. Susan had been standing near the edge of the kitchen island, clutching her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles were perfectly white. She looked at Andre's cold expression, then at my unwavering posture, and the reality of the situation crashed down on her. She realized I was actually willing to call his bluff. She realized I might let him file the injunction locking the money away for years. You have to pay him, Lauren! My mother suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. She rushed forward, grabbing my forearm with trembling hands, her fingernails dug into my skin. You cannot let him freeze that money. We need it right now. You do not understand what is happening. If you do not give Andre what he wants, we are going to lose absolutely everything. Susan, shut up. My father snapped, his face instantly draining of color. He reached out to grab her shoulder, trying to physically pull her back from me. We are not discussing this right now. Keep your mouth shut before you ruin the entire arrangement. But my mother was far too hysterical to listen. The terror in her eyes was entirely genuine. No, Richard, she screamed, swatting his heavy hand away violently. She has to know the truth. She is the only one who has the liquidity to fix this nightmare. She turned back to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect, expensive makeup. We remortgaged the house, Lauren. We took out a massive second mortgage on the family home. $800,000. It is all gone. Every single penny of it is completely gone. I froze, just staring right at her. I slowly pulled my arm away from her frantic grip. You remortgaged the house. I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Why would you ever do that? You owned that property outright for over a decade. You were supposed to be securing your retirement. My mother let out a loud, pathetic sob, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at Brittany. Because of her. Because her ridiculous real estate business failed miserably, and she was drowning in secret credit card debt. Because she leased luxury cars she could never afford, and took lavish vacations she could not pay for just to maintain her image. The collection agencies were preparing to sue her in court. Andre said it would completely ruin his prestige at the law firm if his wife declared public bankruptcy. So your father and I quietly took out the loan to pay off all her massive debts. We thought Andre was going to pay us back from his firm bonuses, but he never did. He just let us bleed dry. Brittany looked away quickly, her face flushing crimson with sudden embarrassment, suddenly very interested in the hardwood floor. Andre just tightened his jaw, refusing to make eye contact with me or his in-laws, his smug lawyer persona failing to hide his utter cowardice. And now the bank is demanding immediate payment. My mother wailed, gripping the edge of the granite island to keep herself from collapsing. We have missed 4 payments in a row, Lauren. We are just weeks away from total foreclosure. They are going to take our home. We came here tonight because we desperately needed you to sign that guarantor contract. If you signed it, Andre could secure a massive loan, take a quiet cash-out option, and secretly pay the bank back to save our house. It was never just about a new mansion for your sister. We are completely broke. We have absolutely nothing left. We are facing absolute financial ruin. The gravity of her confession hit me like a physical blow. The entire narrative they had been spinning for the last 2 days was a desperate, pathetic lie. They were not proud of me. They did not want to celebrate my success. They were drowning in a financial disaster of their own making, caused entirely by the golden child they had always placed above me. They had risked their own home to protect Brittany from the consequences of her terrible choices. And when their reckless financial gamble finally blew up in their faces, they came crawling to me. The invisible daughter, the scapegoat. They had mocked my business at tea, knowing they were entirely dependent on my financial success to survive. The revelation hung heavy in the air. For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was my mother's ragged breathing. She stood there, mascara smeared under her eyes, looking like a cornered animal. My father refused to look at me, his jaw clamped shut in silent fury. Brittany had crossed her arms tight against her chest, her face a mask of bitter resentment. They had been completely exposed. The illusion of their superiority had been stripped away. But if I thought their humiliation would make them back down, I was entirely wrong. Andre let out a slow, deliberate breath. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and stepped right back into the role of the ruthless corporate lawyer. He was completely unfazed by my mother's emotional breakdown. In fact, he seemed to view it as an advantage. He looked at me with an expression of supreme confidence, fully believing that the emotional weight of my parents' impending ruin would be the final blow that broke my resolve. Well, now you know the entire truth, Lauren, he said smoothly, resting his hands on the marble island once again. Your parents are on the brink of losing the family home. Your sister is facing total social and financial ruin. This family needs a massive influx of capital immediately. You have $150 million sitting in your accounts. You can easily afford to part with 10% to save the people who raised you. It is practically a rounding error for you now. I stared at him, my expression completely blank. You are literally holding my startup hostage to pay for Brittany's shopping addictions. I am enforcing my legal right to sweat equity, he corrected sharply. The motivation behind my demand is completely irrelevant to the law. The only thing that matters is that I have the legal leverage to freeze your entire OmniHealth buyout tomorrow morning. I will file the injunction. I will lock your money away for years. Your parents will lose their house. Brittany will face bankruptcy. And you will be stuck in endless litigation watching your brilliant little biotech company rot in legal purgatory. He picked up his briefcase, the brass hardware gleaming under the kitchen lights. He walked around the island, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inches away. He leaned down slightly, looking down his nose at me with a sickeningly arrogant smirk. "You played the rebel for a long time, Lauren," he whispered, his tone dripping with condescension. "You got your little moment in the spotlight. But the game is officially over now. It is time to rejoin reality. You have exactly 24 hours to transfer $15 million into my firm's escrow account. If the funds are not verified by tomorrow night, the injunction gets filed the following morning. Be a good girl and sign the check. Do not ruin your own life just to spite your sister." He turned away from me without waiting for a response, clearly satisfied with his own performance. He looked over at my panicked parents, gesturing aggressively toward the front door. "We are done here. Let us go." My father was the first to move. He gave me one last hard look. "Do the right thing, Lauren," he muttered. He walked out, completely ignoring the torn pieces of the contract on the floor. My mother followed close behind him, wiping her face with a tissue, refusing to meet my eyes again. Brittany lingered for just a second. She offered me a cold, triumphant smile, fully convinced that her husband had just secured her financial future. She turned on her heel and strutted out of my apartment. Andre was the last to leave. He pulled the heavy front door open, stepping out into the hallway. "Remember, Lauren. 24 hours. He pulled the door shut behind him with a loud, definitive click. The sudden silence in my apartment was deafening. I stood alone in my kitchen, the air still thick with the lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfume. I looked down at the cold marble island. Amidst the scattered, torn pieces of the guarantor contract lay the single sheet of paper Andre had left behind. The printed email from 4 years ago, his supposed smoking gun. I carefully reached out and picked up the paper. I read the 2 brief sentences I had written to him all those years ago. Then I read his brief, dismissive reply. I stared at the dates, the timestamps, and the specific subject line. A slow, dangerous smile began to form on my face. Andre was an arrogant, calculating predator. But in his rush to extort me, he had made one absolutely fatal, irreversible mistake. A mistake that would destroy his career. I placed the printed email safely into a thick manila folder and locked it inside my desk drawer. I did not lose a single second of sleep that night. I woke up the next morning feeling more energized than I had in years. I went through my morning routine, drank my black coffee, and headed directly to the temporary executive office OmniHealth had set up for me in their downtown skyscraper. I was completely prepared to counter Andre and his ridiculous legal threats. But I had underestimated how low my sister was willing to sink when she was denied access to my bank accounts. I was barely sitting at my desk when the internal office phone rang. It was the head of public relations for OmniHealth. His voice was incredibly tense. He told me I needed to open my laptop immediately and check my personal social media feeds because a massive public relations crisis was rapidly unfolding online. I opened my web browser and navigated to TikTok. I did not even need to search for my name. The algorithm had already pushed the video to the top of my feed because it was gaining millions of views by the minute. It was a video of Brittany. She was sitting in her expensive living room, but she had deliberately made herself look disheveled. Her usually perfect blonde hair was messy, and she was wearing an oversized gray sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. The lighting was dark and dramatic. A soft, melancholic piano track played in the background to heavily manipulate the emotions of the viewers. I stared at the screen as my sister looked directly into the camera, her eyes red and puffy from crying fake tears. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice trembling perfectly. "I never wanted to take family matters public, but I am desperate. 2 days ago, my sister sold her biotech startup for $150 million. You have probably seen her all over the news. She is being praised as this amazing female founder. But what the media does not know is the absolute monster she has become behind closed doors." Brittany wiped away a tear that managed to escape her eye. She looked down, playing the part of the broken, betrayed sibling flawlessly. While she is out buying private jets and designer clothes, she is intentionally letting our elderly parents go completely homeless. Our parents sacrificed everything to support her little business when it was failing. They even took out a second mortgage on their home just to keep her afloat. And now that the bank is foreclosing on them next week, my billionaire sister refused to give them a single penny. She looked them right in the eye last night and laughed at them. She told them they were on their own. My jaw tightened as I watched her casually rewrite reality for millions of strangers. But she was not finished. "It gets worse." Brittany sobbed, bringing a tissue to her face. "My husband is an incredibly hard-working attorney. He basically built the entire legal foundation of her company for free. He gave her thousands of hours of sweat equity because family helps family. But last night, when he politely asked for his legally owed shares so he could save our parents' house, she ripped up his contracts and threatened him. She defrauded her own brother-in-law. Please share this video. The world needs to know the truth about corporate greed and how money destroys evil people." I paused the video, feeling a cold wave of anger wash over me. I clicked over to Instagram. My cousin Courtney had launched a highly coordinated attack on her own page to back up Brittany. Courtney was currently broadcasting a live video to thousands of viewers, acting as the designated family witness. Courtney was sitting in a coffee shop, aggressively nodding to the camera. "Everything Brittany said is completely true," Courtney declared to her audience. "I was at the family dinner when Lauren told us she did not care if her parents ended up on the street. She is a total narcissist. She used her family to get rich and then discarded us like trash. It is honestly the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. Cancel her. Do not support OmniHealth. They just gave millions to a complete sociopath." The comment section under both videos was an absolute war zone. The American public was incredibly sensitive to stories about greedy corporate billionaires abusing everyday working-class people. The narrative Brittany had expertly spun hit every single emotional trigger point. Thousands of furious strangers were leaving hateful comments, calling me a psychopath, a greedy capitalist, and a terrible daughter. People were tagging the official OmniHealth corporate accounts, demanding they reverse the acquisition and investigate my business practices. Some comments were even trying to organize a boycott of the biomagnetic patches I had spent my entire life creating. They had launched a full-scale character assassination while I was sleeping. Brittany knew she had no actual power over me, so she used the only weapon she had left: the court of public opinion. She figured that if she could create enough public outrage and generate a massive public relations nightmare, OmniHealth would panic and force me to settle the dispute quietly, just to make the bad press disappear. It was a dirty, underhanded tactic designed to terrorize me into writing that $15 million check. The digital fire spread faster than I could have ever anticipated. Within 2 hours, the original videos had crossed 3 million views across multiple platforms. My name was trending on Twitter, right alongside hashtags calling for OmniHealth to completely drop my contract. Angel investors who had been blowing up my phone just yesterday to congratulate me were suddenly tweeting passive-aggressive statements about the paramount importance of founder ethics. The tech community is notoriously fickle, and they love absolutely nothing more than watching a newly minted rising star fall from grace. Prominent venture capitalists began publishing lengthy threads analyzing the supposed legal battle over my sweat equity, completely buying into the fabricated narrative Andre had orchestrated. They debated the moral obligations of startup founders and openly questioned whether my biomagnetic patch technology was actually built on a foundation of stolen family labor. It was agonizing to watch brilliant industry leaders fall for a cheap social media stunt orchestrated by a failing real estate agent and a greedy lawyer. But the online outrage was only the beginning of the nightmare. The corporate fallout started exactly 1 hour later. The internal office phone on my desk rang again. It was not just the public relations department this time. It was the chief executive officer of OmniHealth. His assistant patched him through directly, and his tone was absolutely icy. Reporters from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal were actively blowing up his communication team, asking for official corporate statements regarding the fraud allegations and the impending intellectual property lawsuit from my brother-in-law. The financial journalists who had written glowing profiles about me yesterday were now smelling blood in the water. They wanted the exclusive scoop on the billionaire who betrayed her own family. Omni Health is a publicly traded company, the CEO said, his voice echoing slightly over the speakerphone. Our stock price is incredibly sensitive to this kind of severe negative publicity. We acquired your technology because it was clean and revolutionary. We did not pay $150 million to inherit a messy public family extortion ring. You need to contain this situation immediately, Lauren. If an injunction is actually filed tomorrow morning, or if this media frenzy begins affecting our quarterly projections in any way, the board of directors will not hesitate to invoke the moral turpitude clause in our acquisition agreement. He did not need to explain what that meant. If they invoked that clause, they would freeze the entire transition process indefinitely. The massive funds would be locked in a secure corporate escrow account out of my reach while a team of expensive corporate auditors ripped my entire life apart, looking for financial irregularities. My stomach tied into a tight, heavy knot. Andre knew exactly what he was doing when he gave Brittany the green light to post those crying videos. He was a corporate lawyer. He understood corporate panic. By attacking my public image so aggressively, he was forcing OmniHealth to apply the crushing pressure for him. He wanted me to feel so entirely isolated and terrified of losing my company that I would simply wire him the $15 million to make the agonizing pain stop. The pressure reached its absolute suffocating peak by early afternoon. My email inbox was flooded with hate mail from strangers. My phone battery was draining rapidly from the sheer volume of notifications. I sat alone in the sleek glass-enclosed executive office, feeling the heavy weight of the entire world pressing down on my shoulders. Through the glass walls, I could see OmniHealth employees walking past, whispering to each other and casting suspicious glances in my direction. The narrative had completely shifted. I was no longer the brilliant scientist who had revolutionized female pain management. I was a heartless, greedy villain who was actively evicting her parents and defrauding her hardworking brother-in-law. The absolute injustice of the situation made my blood boil. I had spent years working in a cramped laboratory, maxing out my own credit cards, and sacrificing my personal life to build something that would actually help people. My family had contributed absolutely nothing but constant mockery and endless financial demands. Yet with a few fake tears and a heavily edited piano track, they had managed to turn the entire country against me in a matter of hours. They had successfully backed me into a terrifying corner. I looked at the ticking clock on my laptop screen. It was 2 in the afternoon. Andre had given me until tomorrow morning to wire the funds. The clock was ticking down and my family was fully expecting me to surrender. They honestly believed that this overwhelming public pressure would finally force my total submission and absolute defeat by the very end of business today. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, the silence of my temporary executive office broken only by the distant hum of the city below. The digital clock on my desktop flipped to 2:15 in the afternoon. Every passing minute felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. My phone, which had been practically vibrating off the desk all morning, suddenly fell completely still for a brief moment. Then a single sharp ping broke the silence. A new text message had arrived. I did not want to look at it fully, expecting another death threat from a stranger or another panicked message from an Omni Health Board member demanding immediate explanations. But when I glanced at the locked screen, the sender name made my blood run cold. It was my father, Richard. He had not said a single word to me since he walked out of my apartment the night before, leaving Andre to deliver the final legal ultimatum. I picked up the heavy mobile device, unlocked it, and opened the message thread. The text was short, brutally direct, and completely devoid of any parental affection. It read, "The public response is getting much worse, Lauren. Brittany is completely devastated, and the media is tearing you apart. But we can make all of this stop right now. Transfer the $15 million to Andre by 5 o'clock today. Once the wire transfer clears the firm account, Brittany and Courtney will delete every single video and issue a public apology stating it was a massive misunderstanding. Pay the money and you can keep your little company. Ignore this and the videos stay up forever. My very own father had just sent me a direct written demand for millions of dollars in exchange for stopping a coordinated public smear campaign against my business. It was not a veiled threat. It was not a subtle suggestion. It was an absolute textbook black and white case of criminal extortion. He had literally put a ransom demand in writing and hit send over a cellular network. The sheer arrogance of the text message was breathtaking. Richard was a man who spent his entire life managing mid-level banking operations, a man who prided himself on his financial prudence, yet he was completely blinded by his desperation to save his own house. He and Andre honestly believed they were executing a flawless high-level corporate shakedown. They thought they were outsmarting the naive, invisible daughter who only knew how to play with test tubes and microscopes. They assumed I was so completely paralyzed by the sudden onslaught of internet hatred and corporate pressure that I would just blindly follow their instructions to make the intense pain go away. But as I sat there in the quiet office, staring at that digital ransom note, the suffocating anxiety that had been crushing my chest all morning suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a sharp, icy calm. They had pushed too far. In their incredibly greedy, desperate rush to destroy my reputation, they had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them completely. My father had just crossed a massive legal line, transitioning this situation from a bitter family dispute over a startup charter into a severe federal crime. I immediately took multiple screenshots of the text message. I emailed the images directly to my secure private server, forwarded them to my encrypted backup drive, and printed 3 hard copies using the sleek wireless printer sitting on the credenza behind my desk. I held the warm paper in my hands, feeling the undeniable power of documented evidence. I was not going to negotiate with these terrorists, especially not terrorists who just happened to share my DNA. They had completely miscalculated my strength. I placed the printed screenshot into the same thick manila folder that currently held the 4-year-old email from Andre. The file was growing, transforming into a complete dossier of their calculated betrayal. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate destruction, but they had absolutely no idea the level of warfare I was prepared to unleash. My phone pinged again. It was my assistant reminding me about the emergency crisis meeting scheduled in the main OmniHealth boardroom in exactly 15 minutes. My entire internal startup team was panicking right now, completely terrified that the public relations disaster was going to sink the acquisition and cost them their jobs. I closed my laptop with a sharp snap. I smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal gray suit, picked up the manila folder, and walked out of my temporary office. The fear was gone entirely. My family had demanded $15 million by 5 o'clock today. I was going to finally give them a response they would never forget. The walk down the pristine glass hallway of the OmniHealth executive suite felt entirely different than it had just a few hours ago. Earlier, I was navigating the space as a celebrated innovator, but now the administrative staff avoided eye contact as I passed. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the main boardroom. The room was a massive expanse of polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Chicago skyline. But the breathtaking view was ignored by the team sitting anxiously around the table. This was my core executive team, the brilliant minds who helped me build the biomagnetic patch from a rough prototype into a medical revolution. David, my chief technology officer, was pacing frantically near the presentation screen. Rachel, my head of operations, was aggressively chewing her fingernails while scrolling through her tablet. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind me, they both stopped and looked at me with expressions of sheer terror. "Lauren, we are completely ruined," David blurted out, his voice cracking with panic. He ran a hand through his messy hair, looking exhausted. "The public relations department just called me twice in the last 10 minutes. The boycott hashtags are trending globally. Medical influencers who were praising our clinical trials yesterday are now publicly condemning our corporate ethics. OmniHealth is threatening to pull the plug on the entire integration process. They are terrified of the bad press. Rachel dropped her tablet onto the table with a loud clatter. "We worked for 5 years on this, Lauren," she said, her voice trembling. "We maxed out our credit cards. We slept in the laboratory. We finally secure a $150 million buyout. And now your sister is destroying it on the internet with a fake crying video. We are going to lose everything. The OmniHealth executives are already drafting a suspension notice. We need to issue a massive public apology right now." I walked to the head of the mahogany table and placed my thick manila folder down on the polished wood. I did not speak immediately. I looked at the panicked faces of the people who had sacrificed so much to help me succeed. They were genuinely terrified because they thought we were at the mercy of my manipulative family. They assumed that the angry digital mob had actually won. "Sit down, David," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. "Rachel, take a deep breath. Nobody is issuing a public apology to anyone, and nobody is losing this buyout." David stared at me as if I had completely lost my mind. "Lauren, are you not listening to me?" he pleaded, leaning over the table. "Your brother-in-law is a corporate lawyer. He is going to file a legal injunction tomorrow morning. If he legally freezes the escrow accounts, OmniHealth will trigger the moral turpitude clause. The money will be locked away indefinitely. We cannot afford to fight a massive corporate law firm in federal court. We do not have the capital for a protracted legal war." I pulled out the leather chair at the head of the table and sat down. I opened my sleek silver laptop and pressed the power button. The screen illuminated immediately, casting a soft glow in the dim boardroom. I connected my computer to the massive presentation monitor mounted on the far wall. "We are not going to fight a legal war, David," I replied, keeping my eyes on the booting screen. "Because there is absolutely no legal war to fight. Andre thinks he is a brilliant predator, but he is actually just a greedy amateur playing a game he does not fully understand." Rachel sat down slowly, her eyes darting between me and the giant monitor on the wall. "What are you talking about, Lauren?" she asked, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. "He has a printed email from 4 years ago. He is claiming foundational sweat equity. It is a standard legal extortion tactic. It is only an extortion tactic if the target actually caves under the pressure," I stated firmly. My laptop finished loading. I bypassed my email inbox, which was currently flooded with thousands of hateful messages. I ignored the alerts from the OmniHealth public relations team. Instead, I opened a heavily encrypted folder on my hard drive. I double-clicked the master file. The screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a heavily redacted 300-page legal document. It was the final officially executed merger and acquisition contract between my startup and the OmniHealth conglomerate. The same contract Andre was threatening to freeze. I began scrolling rapidly past the basic financial disclosures and standard liability waivers, moving directly toward the deeply buried punitive measures designed for this exact situation. I stopped scrolling when I reached page 214. The text on the massive monitor highlighted a highly specific subsection regarding external legal interference and fraudulent equity claims. I did not bother explaining the dense legal jargon to David or Rachel. They were brilliant engineers and operators, but this was a battlefield designed specifically for corporate sharks. I simply pulled out my phone and dialed a direct private number. The room fell completely silent as the call connected. Gregory, speaking the voice on the other end, answered. Gregory was the ruthless head of the OmniHealth legal department. He was a man who had built his terrifying reputation by crushing rival pharmaceutical companies in federal court. He was not a man who tolerated public relations messes or extortion attempts. "Gregory." "This is Lauren," I said, keeping my voice entirely professional and devoid of panic. "I am sitting in my boardroom right now, looking at subsection 4.2 of our finalized acquisition agreement regarding tortious interference and fraudulent encumbrances. I need to formally notify OmniHealth of a pending frivolous injunction regarding a fabricated sweat equity claim. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. The public relations disaster, I assume Gregory replied, his tone instantly dropping 10 degrees. The chief executive officer just briefed my department on your sister and those ridiculous social media videos. Lauren, if this is a legitimate equity dispute, our compliance department will freeze the escrow accounts immediately. We do not absorb undisclosed liability. It is not a legitimate liability, Gregory I countered smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. It is a textbook shakedown disguised as a corporate grievance. The claimant is my brother-in-law. He possesses a single informal email from 4 years ago regarding a completely different aborted project. There is no formalized contract, no logged billable hours, and absolutely no transfer of intellectual property rights. He is leveraging the current social media smear campaign to extort a $15 million settlement under the threat of filing a bad faith injunction tomorrow morning. I heard the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard as Gregory began pulling up my corporate file on his end. An extortion attempt via a frivolous injunction is an annoyance, Lauren, he stated coldly. But it is still a legal filing that will tie up our transition timeline. Who exactly is this brother-in-law, and what strip mall law firm is he operating out of? His name is Andre, I replied, pulling the printed email from my manila folder and reading the corporate signature block at the bottom of the page. He is a senior associate at Campbell, and Reed focusing on corporate structuring and mergers. The mechanical typing on Gregory's end stopped entirely. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear Rachel breathing nervously. Repeat that firm name to me, Gregory demanded, his voice suddenly vibrating with a dangerous new energy. Campbell and Reed, I repeated clearly, keeping my eyes on my startup team. A low, dark chuckle echoed through the phone speaker. Lauren, are you absolutely certain that this man Andre is currently employed by Campbell and Reed and is threatening to file an injunction against OmniHealth using their corporate letterhead? I am staring right at his formal written demand and his active firm credentials right now, I confirmed. Gregory let out another laugh, but this one was completely devoid of humor. It was the sound of a predator that had just cornered its prey. Lauren, he said, his tone dripping with absolute lethal satisfaction. Campbell and Reed is not just some random corporate law firm. They are our external retained counsel for international mergers. They currently represent OmniHealth in 3 active federal acquisitions. Your arrogant brother-in-law is attempting to extort the founder of a company his own firm is being paid millions of dollars to successfully acquire. David and Rachel both gasped simultaneously. The staggering realization finally washed over the boardroom. That is a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty, Gregory continued, practically growling into the receiver. It is an undeniable direct conflict of interest. He is actively sabotaging his own firm's major client for his own personal financial gain. If he actually files that injunction tomorrow, he will not just be laughed out of court. He will be permanently disbarred, and his prestigious firm will face massive malpractice liabilities from us. I know, I said, a cold smile finally breaking across my face as I looked at the contract on the wall. That is exactly why I called you today, Gregory. I want to execute a completely flawless, highly coordinated legal trap. I think it is time we formally invite Andre and his family to your impressive headquarters tomorrow morning to settle this ridiculous equity dispute face to face. Gregory let out a sharp breath of approval on the other end of the line. I like the way you do business, Lauren, he said, his tone shifting from irritated to genuinely impressed. What exactly is your play here? If we bring him into the building, we need a rock-solid reason that does not violate our own security protocols regarding active extortionists. I pointed to the massive screen displaying the heavily redacted contract. I am formally invoking Clause 4.2.a under the Dispute Resolution section, I told him. It explicitly states that any intellectual property or equity claim brought forward during the transition period must undergo a mandatory arbitration meeting at the OmniHealth headquarters before any external legal filings can be made. If he refuses to attend, he legally forfeits his right to file the injunction. If he does attend, he walks right into our trap. Gregory chuckled. And since he works for our retained external counsel, I will personally invite the managing partner of Campbell and Reed to join us via secure video link tomorrow morning. He needs to see exactly what his senior associate is doing with his firm resources. We will have our entire legal department waiting in the glass boardroom on the 50th floor. Consider the clause officially activated, Lauren. I will see you at 9 o'clock sharp tomorrow. The line went dead. I placed my phone back on the desk. David and Rachel were staring at me with their mouths slightly open. The sheer terror that had gripped them just a few minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a profound sense of awe. You are not just going to beat him, Rachel whispered, leaning back in her chair. You are going to completely destroy his entire career in front of the Omni Health legal team. I closed my laptop and unplugged it from the presentation monitor. He decided to use his career to threaten my company, I replied smoothly. I am simply letting his own arrogance do the heavy lifting. Go back to your desks. Ignore the social media noise. Tell the rest of the team that the acquisition is perfectly safe and that tomorrow we are moving forward exactly as planned. They both nodded quickly, suddenly energized by the aggressive counterattack. They hurried out of the boardroom, leaving me alone in the quiet space. I picked up my phone again. It was time to send the invitation. I needed to craft the text message perfectly. I had to make Andre believe that his extortion tactic had worked flawlessly. I had to make my family think that the intense public pressure had finally broken my spirit. I opened the message thread with my father and ignored his previous ransom demand. Instead, I opened a new message directly to Andre. I typed slowly, ensuring every word sounded appropriately defeated. Andre, you win, I typed. The public backlash is destroying my company and Omni Health is threatening to pull the contract. I cannot afford to fight you in federal court. I am invoking the mandatory dispute resolution clause in my contract. Bring the printed email and bring the family. We will meet at the Omni Health headquarters downtown tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp on the 50th floor. My legal team will review your document and we will settle the $15 million equity dispute face-to-face so you do not file the injunction. I just want this nightmare to end completely. I read the message twice. It was the perfect bait. It fed his massive ego and promised him exactly what he wanted. I hit send. I did not have to wait long. Less than 2 minutes later, my screen lit up with his reply. Smart girl Lauren, Andre texted back. I knew you would eventually see reason. We will be there at 9. Have the wire transfer paperwork ready to sign. Do not try any stupid tricks. I locked my phone and slipped it quietly into my front pocket. A cold and deeply satisfying feeling quickly settled over my tired chest. The trap was officially set, and the bait had been swallowed completely whole. They were probably celebrating right now in the suburbs, popping cheap champagne and praising Andre for his brilliant legal mind. My mother was likely already planning how to decorate her newly saved house, while Brittany dreamed of luxury shopping sprees. They honestly believed they had beaten the system and secured their future. They had absolutely no idea they were walking blindly into a highly coordinated corporate slaughterhouse. I picked up my thick manila folder, turned off the boardroom lights, and slowly walked out into the quiet hallway. Tomorrow morning, my family was going to learn a very painful lesson about the devastating consequences of extreme greed. The next morning arrived with a clear, crisp blue sky over the Chicago skyline. I stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Omni Health executive boardroom on the 50th floor, sipping a black coffee. The glass walls offered an unobstructed view of the city, a sprawling grid of power and commerce. Behind me, the massive mahogany table was prepared. I checked my watch. It was 8:45 in the morning. At exactly 8:55, the heavy glass double doors of the boardroom swung open. Andre walked in first, leading my family like a victorious general entering a conquered territory. The level of sheer arrogance radiating from the four of them was almost suffocating. They did not just walk into the room, They strutted. Andre was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored Italian suit that likely cost more than a standard compact car. He held his expensive leather briefcase tightly in his left hand, his chin raised high, looking around the sophisticated corporate space as if he were already evaluating the decor for his future office. Brittany was right beside him, draped in head-to-toe Chanel. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors, carrying an absurdly large designer handbag. She had completely abandoned the messy hair and oversized sweater from her viral crying videos. Today, she looked like a woman who was about to go on a massive luxury shopping spree with someone else's money. My parents, Richard and Susan, followed closely behind them, attempting to mirror the same entitled swagger. My father wore a stiff dark suit that looked incredibly uncomfortable, while my mother was adorned in heavy gold jewelry and a brightly colored silk blouse. They all looked entirely out of place in the sleek, ultra-modern OmniHealth headquarters, but they were far too blinded by their own greed to notice. Andre completely ignored me standing by the window. He walked directly to the head of the mahogany table, pulled out the largest leather chair, and sat down with a heavy sigh of satisfaction. He placed his briefcase squarely on the polished wood and popped the brass latches open with a loud click. "This is a nice space," Andre commented loudly, looking at the ceiling. "Not quite the aesthetic I would choose for my own firm, but it works for a medical conglomerate. I suppose they have to keep things somewhat sterile." Brittany giggled, sliding into the chair next to him. She pulled out her phone and immediately started checking her makeup in the front-facing camera. "Oh, it is fine for now," she said dismissively. "Wait until you buy your equity partnership at Campbell and Reed next month, babe. Your corner office is going to be twice this size. We are going to have to hire an interior designer from New York just to do it justice." Andre smiled a smug, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. "Well, with an extra $15 million in liquid capital hitting the accounts this week, I think securing that senior partnership is basically a formality at this point. I have already drafted the initial buy-in proposal for the managing partners. It is amazing what a little aggressive litigation can do for your career trajectory." My father, Richard, leaned over the table, his eyes practically gleaming with anticipation. "You are absolutely sure they are going to pay out today?" Richard asked, his voice low and eager. "The bank called me again this morning about the foreclosure notice. We need that cash to clear by Friday or we lose the house." Andre waved his hand dismissively, not even looking at his father-in-law. "Relax, Richard. I told you corporate legal departments are completely predictable. They hate bad press, and they hate pending injunctions even more." The moment Lauren agreed to this arbitration meeting, I knew we had them cornered. They are just going to try to negotiate the number down, but I am not accepting a single penny less than 10%. I have all the leverage here. They are terrified. Susan let out a heavy sigh of relief, patting her hair perfectly into place. "Oh, thank goodness," she muttered. "I have already picked out new landscaping for the front yard. This nightmare is finally over." I stood silently by the window, watching them divide my life's work among themselves before the meeting had even officially begun. They were so incredibly confident in their own brilliance. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they were saying was being recorded by the high-definition security cameras seamlessly integrated into the boardroom ceiling. I finally turned away from the window and walked slowly toward the table. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. Andre leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Morning, Lauren. I am glad you finally decided to stop fighting and be reasonable. It saves us all a lot of unnecessary legal fees. Where is the OmniHealth transition team? I have a busy schedule today, and I want to get these settlement papers signed and notarized before lunch." I stopped at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, resting my hands lightly on the polished surface. "They are on their way, Andre," I replied, a small, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face. "And I assure you, they are incredibly eager to discuss your legal theories with you." As soon as the words left my mouth, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open for the second time. I did not move toward the empty leather chairs. I stood perfectly still by the expansive window and watched the temperature in the room drop. Gregory walked in first. He was an imposing man in his late 50s with incredibly sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He was not wearing a flashy designer outfit like Andre. Gregory wore a meticulously tailored conservative charcoal suit that screamed old money and absolute corporate dominance. He carried a single slim black folder. Behind Gregory followed 4 elite attorneys from the OmniHealth General Counsel office. They moved into the room in perfect unison, forming a terrifying phalanx of legal firepower. There was absolutely no casual banter among them. There were no arrogant smirks. Their faces were entirely blank and hardened by years of tearing apart hostile corporate takeovers and crushing frivolous lawsuits. They were the ultimate corporate apex predators, and they had just entered the feeding grounds. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted so violently that my mother actually jumped in her seat. Brittany lowered her expensive phone, her perfectly glossed lips parting in sudden confusion. She looked at the 5 imposing figures fanning out across the room, and then looked over at Andre for reassurance. But Andre was not looking at her at all. Andre was staring directly at Gregory. I watched the smug, self-satisfied grin slowly slide completely off his face. It was immediately replaced by a sudden, rigid tension in his jaw. As a corporate lawyer himself, Andre recognized the heavy aura of apex legal authority immediately. He knew instinctively that these were not mid-level transition managers sent here to negotiate a quick financial settlement for a family dispute. These were the heavy hitters. Gregory walked to the center of the massive mahogany table, stopping directly across from where Andre was sitting. The other 4 OmniHealth lawyers took strategic positions standing right behind the empty chairs, their hands neatly clasped. None of them sat down. I remained standing by the window, my arms crossed tightly, watching the trap finally spring shut. I was the chief executive officer of the acquired company, and I was actively refusing to take a seat at my own arbitration meeting. It was a highly calculated power move, designed specifically to let them know I was no longer negotiating as an invisible family member. I was acting as their corporate executioner today. Gregory placed his single black folder onto the polished wood. He did not open it. He simply looked down at Andre, his eyes scanning the younger lawyer with a potent mixture of professional curiosity and profound disgust. "Good morning," Gregory said, his voice incredibly deep and resonant. "I am Gregory, the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for OmniHealth globally. With me are the senior partners of our internal litigation and corporate compliance divisions. We are the fully authorized representatives for this mandatory dispute resolution meeting today." My father swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. He suddenly looked very small in his stiff suit. Susan gripped the thick edge of the table, her gold bracelets clinking against the wood. They had expected a quiet payout to save their house. They had never anticipated facing a literal army of ruthless corporate litigators. Andre forced a very tight, artificial smile, trying desperately to regain control of the room. He sat up much straighter. "Good morning, Gregory. I am Andre, a senior associate at Campbell and Reed. I am representing the foundational equity interests in this matter. We have a straightforward claim today regarding uncompensated legal consultation, and I am fully prepared to present our documentation so we can finalize a settlement and avoid any unnecessary injunctions that might delay your acquisition process." Gregory did not smile back at him. He did not reach for a chair. He simply tapped his index finger exactly once against the dark cover of his black folder. He let the silence stretch out for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing Andre to sit in his own nervous, terrified energy. "You are a senior associate at Campbell and Reed," Gregory repeated very slowly, tasting the specific words as if they were incredibly poisonous. "That is a highly prestigious firm, Andre. They handle some of our most sensitive international mergers. In fact, they are currently on a massive retainer for OmniHealth." Andre blinked rapidly, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his brown eyes. He clearly had absolutely no idea his own law firm was actively working with the massive OmniHealth conglomerate. "Yes, they are an excellent corporate firm," he replied very cautiously. "But I am simply acting in an independent capacity here today, representing my family interests in a private equity claim." Gregory did not even blink at Andre's pathetic attempt to justify his arrogant presence. "Independent capacity." Gregory repeated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "We will address the massive ethical violation of that statement in a moment. But first, our Chief Executive Officer has a presentation regarding the validity of your claim." Gregory stepped back, allowing me to take control of the room. I reached into my suit jacket pocket and pulled out a small wireless presentation remote. I pressed a single button, and the mechanical blinds covering the glass walls slid shut, plunging the room into artificial dimness. A massive projector screen descended silently from the ceiling directly behind Gregory and his formidable legal team. I walked to the head of the table, my heels clicking sharply. "Let us talk about your completely baseless sweat equity, Andre," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "You came to my home. You threatened to freeze a $150 million corporate acquisition. You incited a smear campaign that damaged our stock valuation. And you claimed you did all of this because you legally own 10% of my company based on a single email." Andre shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, desperately trying to maintain his arrogant posture. "I provided foundational corporate structuring advice," he argued, his voice slightly higher than before. "That constitutes sweat equity under state law, Lauren. You cannot project a PowerPoint and rewrite legal precedent." I pressed the small clicker in my hand. The projector flared to life, illuminating the dark room. "I am not rewriting precedent, Andre," I replied smoothly. "I am clarifying the timeline." The massive screen displayed the exact email Andre had printed out the night before. It showed the date stamp from 4 years ago, and the brief exchange between us. My mother leaned forward, her eyes darting between the screen and Andre. Brittany crossed her arms, looking bored, assuming this was just a technical formality before they got their check. "This specific email is from 4 years ago," I continued, pacing slowly behind the empty leather chairs. "You advised me on a startup charter. But what you conveniently forgot is that 4 years ago I was not building a biomagnetic pain management company." I pressed the clicker again. The screen instantly changed, displaying a massive, highly detailed official corporate dissolution document. 4 years ago, I was trying to launch a small dietary supplement tracking application. I explained, projecting my voice so every word echoed clearly. That startup project completely failed. It went bankrupt within 8 months. I formally dissolved that corporate entity and liquidated all of its worthless assets. The charter you reviewed was for a dead company that has not existed for 3.5 years. Andre stared at the screen, his mouth falling slightly open. The color rapidly drained from his face, as his brilliant legal strategy completely evaporated in front of his very own eyes. I pressed the clicker one final time. The screen flashed, displaying the official United States Patent and Trademark Office, filing for my biomagnetic patch technology. The OmniHealth lawyer stared at the bright screen with absolute cold precision. "This is the foundational patent for the technology OmniHealth just purchased," I stated, pointing directly at the massive date stamp highlighted in bright yellow. It was filed exactly 2 years ago. 2 full years after the email you are using to extort me. You never saw this charter. You never advised me on this corporate structure. You have absolutely zero legal connection to this buyout." The silence in the boardroom was absolute and utterly suffocating. My father slowly slumped back into his chair, his face turning a sickly shade of pale gray. He finally understood that there was no money coming. The massive second mortgage on his house was going to bury him completely. Brittany took off her oversized sunglasses, her hands shaking as she looked at her husband in sheer panic. Andre swallowed hard, his throat feeling completely dry. He tried to speak, but could not find a single word to defend himself against the undeniable documentary evidence. Gregory stepped forward again, placing his hands flat on the mahogany table. He leaned aggressively toward Andre. "Let me be clear about what is happening here today," Andre Gregory said, his voice vibrating with lethal corporate menace. "You did not come here to resolve a legitimate equity dispute. You used a legally worthless document regarding a dissolved company to threaten a publicly traded conglomerate. You coordinated a malicious social media attack to artificially inflate the pressure of your demands. Under law, that is not a civil dispute. That is a textbook definition of criminal extortion and wire fraud." Andre scrambled to find his voice. "Extortion," he stammered, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. "You are severely overstepping, Gregory. This is a private family financial matter. You cannot prove criminal intent. My firm will completely back my right to pursue foundational equity. We have massive litigation resources, and we will not be bullied by a corporate compliance department." Gregory slowly shook his head, an expression of almost pity crossing his hardened features. "You still do not understand what you have done, Andre. You just invoked the protection of your prestigious law firm, but you clearly failed to run a basic client conflict check before you decided to launch this pathetic extortion scheme against our chief executive officer." Gregory reached out and finally opened the single black folder he had brought into the boardroom. He extracted a thick, heavily watermarked legal contract and slid it across the table toward Andre. "This is the master retainer agreement between the OmniHealth Global Conglomerate and the law firm of Campbell and Reed. We pay your firm millions of dollars annually to represent our interests in major corporate acquisitions. We are one of your managing partners' most valuable clients." Andre stared at the document as if it were a live explosive. His arrogant facade completely shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at the OmniHealth logo printed next to his own law firm's letterhead. The reality of his catastrophic mistake crashed down on him with devastating force. By threatening to file an injunction against Lauren, you are actively threatening to sabotage a $150 million acquisition that your own employer is being paid to execute. Gregory explained, his voice echoing coldly in the silent room. "You are using your position as a senior associate to financially extort the founder of a company that your firm legally represents by proxy. That is not just a minor ethical slip, Andre. That is the ultimate conflict of interest. It is a catastrophic breach of your fiduciary duty." Brittany looked back and forth between her husband and the imposing corporate lawyer. "Andre, what is he talking about?" she asked, her voice shrill with rising panic. "Tell him he is completely wrong right now. You promised me we were entirely secure. You said you had all the legal leverage in the entire world. You promised me we were getting $15 million today in cash to buy the new suburban mansion." Andre could not even look at her. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his expensive Italian suit. He knew exactly what a breach of fiduciary duty meant in the elite corporate legal world. It was an absolute career death sentence. No prestigious firm would ever hire a lawyer who actively extorted their own corporate clients. His entire professional identity, his wealth, his high status, and his future partnership were evaporating right in front of his very eyes. I walked slowly around the table, stopping right next to Andre. "You were so incredibly eager to prove you were the absolute smartest person in the room," I said, looking down at him. "You thought you could use the legal system to terrorize me into funding your lavish lifestyle. But you were so blinded by your own desperate greed that you did not even bother to check who was actually buying my company. You walked right into a massive ethical trap because you arrogantly assumed I was just too weak to ever fight back against you. You saw a quiet woman you could easily manipulate and abuse without facing any real-world consequences. You completely underestimated my basic intelligence." My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a low groan of absolute despair. His shoulders shook as the terrible reality finally settled in. The massive house loan he had secretly taken out to cover Brittany's hidden debts was now a permanent crushing weight that would destroy his peaceful retirement. My mother just stared blankly at the glass wall, completely paralyzed by the sudden violent destruction of all their perfect financial plans. She finally realized her precious golden child had completely ruined everything. They had gambled their entire future on Andre's supposed legal brilliance, and he had just led them directly over a very steep cliff. Gregory closed his black folder. "We do not tolerate rogue attorneys threatening our financial investments," Gregory stated firmly. "I have already contacted the State Bar Association regarding your active extortion attempt and your gross ethical violations. I made an interesting phone call this morning before you arrived. I reached out to the managing partner at Campbell and Reed to inform him what his associate was doing with the firm letterhead. He was very eager to speak with you today about your future." Gregory stepped aside and raised his hands, signaling to a junior attorney standing by the wall. The lawyer tapped a tablet and the massive projector screen instantly flickered. The bright white background was replaced by a high-definition video feed. Sitting behind a massive oak desk in a corner office overlooking the city was Jonathan Wallace, the senior managing partner and founder of Campbell and Reed. His face was entirely devoid of warmth. He looked like a man preparing to deliver a lethal execution order. Andre stared at the massive screen, his breath hitching audibly. "Mr. Wallace?" He managed to whisper, his voice trembling so violently it was barely coherent. "Do not speak to me." Jonathan Wallace barked through the boardroom speakers, his voice cracking like a physical whip across the silent room. "You do not have the right to speak. You are going to sit there and listen. I spent 30 years building this law firm into one of the most respected corporate legal institutions in this country. We built a flawless reputation based on absolute ethical integrity and ruthless efficiency. We secure massive corporate retainers because clients trust us implicitly with their sensitive financial transactions. And you, a senior associate who is actively under consideration for a partnership, decided to jeopardize our entire reputation to extort a woman out of $15 million using our firm letterhead. I was just representing my family." Andre stammered frantically, trying to salvage the rapidly sinking ship. "It was a private matter. I never intended to involve the firm in this dispute." Wallace slammed his heavy hand down on his desk, the loud impact echoing through the overhead speakers. "Do not insult my intelligence, you pathetic fool. You threatened to file an injunction using formal firm credentials. You attempted to freeze a $150 million corporate buyout that my firm is actively being paid to execute. You created a massive conflict of interest that could easily open Campbell and Reed up to unprecedented malpractice litigation. You did not just betray your family today, Andre. You betrayed this firm, and you betrayed the legal profession." Andre opened his mouth again, but absolutely no sound came out. The sheer terror of facing the absolute peak of his profession paralyzed him. Brittany was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly, her knuckles were stark white, her eyes darting frantically between the glowing screen and her panicked husband. Effective immediately, Jonathan Wallace continued his tone, turning ice cold and entirely clinical. "You are officially terminated from Campbell and Reed. You are fired with cause. Every single one of your corporate accounts has already been locked. Your key card has been deactivated. Security is currently boxing up your personal items from your office, and they will be shipped directly to your home address. You are explicitly forbidden from ever stepping foot on firm property again." "But my benefits?" Andre choked out a single tear of absolute desperation sliding down his face. "My equity buy-in. I have valuable stock options vesting this quarter. You have absolutely nothing," Wallace fired back relentlessly. "Because you are being terminated for severe ethical violations and gross misconduct. Your signed employment contract dictates that you automatically forfeit all unvested stock options, lucrative severance packages, and firm health benefits. You walk away with nothing but your final paycheck. And frankly, considering the massive damage you caused today, you should consider yourself incredibly lucky. I am not filing a civil suit against you to recover financial damages." Andre swayed on his feet, the blood completely draining from his face. But Wallace was not finished delivering the final crushing blow. Furthermore, Wallace added, leaning into his camera lens so his eyes seemed to stare right through Andre. My executive team is currently drafting a comprehensive formal complaint to the State Bar Association. We are submitting all the physical evidence of your extortion attempt and your gross violation of fiduciary duty. You will be thoroughly investigated, and I will personally ensure that you are permanently disbarred. You will never practice law in this state or any other state ever again. We are completely done here. Before Andre could even utter a single syllable of protest or beg for mercy, the video feed cut out abruptly. The massive screen behind Gregory went completely black. The silence in the boardroom was heavier than concrete. Andre stood perfectly still. Then his knees completely buckled beneath him. He collapsed backward into the heavy leather chair with a loud thud. His arms dangled uselessly. The arrogant lawyer who had strutted into the room just 20 minutes ago was gone. In his place sat a broken, unemployed man facing absolute financial and professional ruin. The heavy leather chair groaned loudly beneath the immense weight as Andre stared blankly at the dark screen. The arrogant corporate shark had been completely gutted in under 10 minutes. Brittany stood frozen, her shaking hands covering her mouth, finally understanding that her endless stream of luxury shopping had just cost her husband his entire career. But while Brittany and Andre were drowning in immediate ruin, my parents suddenly remembered the ticking clock hovering over their own heads. The massive second mortgage they took out to fund Brittany was still actively defaulting. With Andre utterly destroyed and stripped of his lucrative income, their absolute last hope for a financial rescue had evaporated into thin air. My mother Susan broke the silence first. She let out a ragged sob and practically threw herself across the mahogany table toward me. "Lauren, please," she begged, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently as she reached out. "You have to help us now. You are the only one left. We are your parents. You cannot stand there and let the bank throw us out onto the street. We made a terrible mistake trusting Andre with our finances, but we only did it because we love our family. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have $150 million. $800,000 is absolutely nothing to you. Please save our family home." My father Richard suddenly found his voice completely abandoning the stern patriarch persona he used to terrorize me my entire life. He stepped around the table, his posture stooped and defeated. "Lauren, your mother is right," he pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "We were completely wrong to treat you the way we did. I see that now. We were blinded by the stress of the debt. If we do not wire the past due balance to the bank by tomorrow morning, they are initiating the formal eviction process. We will be completely ruined. Write the check today, and I swear to you things will be entirely different from now on." I looked at the two pathetic people who spent my entire childhood making me feel entirely worthless. They were not apologizing because they felt remorse for treating me like an outcast. They were apologizing because they had officially run out of options. I reached down to the sleek black leather briefcase I had brought with me and placed it on the table. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a fresh manila folder. It was much heavier than the one containing the completely worthless email. I placed the folder on the polished wood and slowly slid it across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of my father. "You do not need to worry about wiring any past due balances to the bank tomorrow morning," I said, my voice completely steady and entirely devoid of pity. My father looked down at the folder, a sudden, desperate glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes. He eagerly flipped open the heavy cardstock cover, fully expecting to see a certified bank check or a signed payment authorization form. Instead, he suddenly saw a massive stack of complex real estate transfer documents, heavily notarized and officially stamped by the county clerk. He stared at the bold, capitalized legal heading at the top of the very first page, his brow furrowing in a state of deep confusion. "I did not write you a check to save your house," I explained, watching the confusion on his face slowly morph into sheer terror. Yesterday afternoon, immediately after my company acquisition funds cleared the escrow accounts, I had my personal wealth management team contact your mortgage lender directly. Banks despise dealing with the messy, protracted legal process of residential foreclosures. They simply prefer instant, clean liquidity. So I offered to buy your defaulted second mortgage entirely in cash, right on the spot. They accepted my premium offer without a single moment of hesitation. The transaction was fully finalized and legally recorded first thing this morning. My mother gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "You bought it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the boardroom air conditioning. "I did not just buy the house, Susan," I corrected her coldly. "I purchased the underlying debt that you recklessly accumulated in an attempt to spoil your favorite child. I now own every single legal right associated with that specific property loan. I am no longer just the scapegoat daughter you can endlessly belittle and demand money from whenever you run into trouble. You have absolutely no leverage left. The reality is very simple. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am your sole creditor. I am the bank now. More importantly, I am your new landlord." My father stared at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a completely unrecognizable monster. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but he could not articulate a single coherent word. My mother grabbed the heavy edge of the mahogany table, her legs giving out slightly as she slumped back into the leather chair next to my father. The sheer weight of their catastrophic financial failure was finally pressing them directly into the floor. They had walked into this building expecting to bully me into handing over a massive fortune. Instead, they were leaving with absolutely nothing. I opened the thick manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. It had a bright red certified stamp pressed firmly at the top margin. I slid the document across the polished wood until it rested directly on top of the original property deed. "This is your formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the thick silence of the executive boardroom. The defaulted mortgage contract gave the bank the absolute right to initiate immediate foreclosure and eviction proceedings without any grace period. As the new legal owner of that exact debt, I am exercising my right today. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your entire life and vacate the premises. I continued, locking eyes with my father. If you are not completely moved out by the last day of the month, I will have the county sheriff physically remove your belongings and change the locks. "You cannot do this to us," my mother shrieked, tears streaming heavily down her face and ruining her expensive silk blouse. "We are your family, Lauren. Where are we supposed to go now? We do not have any money left to rent a new place. You should have thought about that before you gambled your entire retirement away to fund Brittany," I replied coldly. "You actively chose your favorite daughter over your own financial security. Now you get to live with the devastating consequences of that choice. Perhaps you can move into her tiny apartment, since she will not be buying that massive new mansion anymore." That single sentence acted like a lit match dropped directly into a massive pool of gasoline. Brittany, who had been standing frozen in absolute shock, suddenly snapped out of her bewildered trance. She spun around and glared at our parents with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You promised me you had this under control," Brittany screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the glass room. "You told me Andre was going to fix everything and get us the $15 million. You completely ruined my life. I have massive credit card debt. My leased luxury car is about to be repossessed by the dealership. How am I supposed to survive if you do not even have a house for me to live in right now?" My father leaped up from his chair, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "Do not you dare raise your voice to me, you spoiled brat," he roared back. "We lost absolutely everything because of you. We remortgaged our home to pay for your ridiculous designer bags and your failing real estate business. You bled us completely dry, and now we are going to be homeless." Brittany turned her furious gaze toward Andre, who was still sitting slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the dark presentation screen on the wall. "And you," she shrieked, kicking the heavy leg of his leather chair violently. "You are a useless failure. You told me you were a brilliant lawyer. You told me we were going to be incredibly rich today. Now you are unemployed and facing immediate disbarment. I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. Andre finally looked up, his eyes filled with a cold, bitter hatred. File it, he spat back. You are a massive liability, Brittany. You destroyed my entire career with your constant whining and your pathetic social media stunts. I stood silently at the head of the mahogany table, watching the perfect affluent family tear each other apart like a pack of starving wolves. There was no loyalty left between them. There was no love. The moment the money evaporated, their entire bond completely shattered. They were turning on each other with the exact same vicious cruelty they had directed at me my entire life. I felt absolutely no pity for them. I felt no lingering guilt. I closed my empty leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut with finality. I simply turned my back and walked through the heavy glass doors. I rode the private elevator down to my waiting black SUV, leaving my entire family behind to suffer in the miserable ruins of their own selfish greed.